a fallen fighter lies on the ground. As in the end everyone perished. In the man's grip is a red gem, a red jewel vanishes from MC's hand. Aang's face is covered in blood and he states that, though he is known as the mightiest fighter, he will soon pass away, so he is not fit for this title. The warrior rests among the beasts and only now grasps that he defeated all the fiends of the 7th level. Scraping the dirt with his fingers, he ponders why he did this. The hero stands up from the earth and does not comprehend why, in the Gan obelisk, there were also fiends of the 8th level. The creature trades on the corpses of people, and humanity had no hint about the strength of fiends. Aang opens his mouth in agony and says it is his fault since he failed his title of the mightiest. The fiend glares at him fiercely with an injured face. The fighter thinks that it is scheming something. The fiend charges at him. MC sees the creature swinging its talons toward him and believes they aim to rip him apart because he slew many of them. The creature extends its claw toward him. The man's eyes shut and he believes this darkness is death. A tiny spark grows bigger and he sees light. It becomes very bright. The fighter's boots stand on a metal floor and they are commanded to form a line. MC opened his eyes in panic, clasped his hands behind his back, and does not grasp what is occurring. He looks around and questions where he is and why he did not perish. MC stares at his hand in doubt and says this does not feel like a dream and everything seems very real. A small version of the hero thinks, gripping his face with his hand, yells that it is not his and does not know where his face and strong body are. MC shouts in hopelessness, asking who he is. In the entire room, he asked even louder where he is. The yell echoes through the building. Daytime city of Helios, the leader stands before the fighters and asks if they know Captain J. Yea firmly asks if they understand what it means to pass the trial of battle, and what it means to be a fighter, because they are the symbol of safety and hope. Smoke rises from the wreckage of the city when 6 massive stone pillars fell from the sky in 3069, and from that day their world ended. Various creatures attack people, and from these pillars drop beings called fiends because they cruelly killed everyone nearby. The creature lies among the researchers because humanity, after a fierce fight that nearly caused their extinction, created a way to battle fiends. A ruby is fused onto the circuit board, and this is called the merging technique. The outline of a man stands with a glowing core in his chest because in this method the core is taken from the body of fiends, and it allows people to undergo merging, which briefly grants the same power as a fiend. The outline of MC stands with his back turned, and 60 years ago, he was known as the greatest and strongest fighter of humanity. The fighters led by the hero charged toward the creatures because this warrior was honored by all as if he were a king, and he guided others in an assault against the fiercest wave of fiends. The fighters battled the fiends, and their attack lasted for weeks so that even the sky darkened. The creatures lie dead because, in the end, the fighters repelled their assault, and only weak fiends remained, thus a 60-year pause began. Aang opened his eyes in shock and cannot believe he was moved into the future 60 years. Tang says with irritation that they lost many great and brave fighters forever. MC stands on the corpses of creatures, and they lost one known as the strongest fighter of humanity when he fought the 7th-ranked fiends. A man stands on heaps of creatures, and this great clash between humans and fiends showed that humanity will fight to the end to see a new dawn, so it became known as the Battle at Dawn. In MC's eyes, fiends are fighting, and he hears that the highest rank of fiends is not the 7th but the 8th, so he starts to realize that until now, humanity does not know the true strength of fiends. The captain angrily yells that, if not for those fighters, they would not have this familiar life at home. Tang explains to the fighters that this means their wish to protect people and offer hope. The guys shout yes when he asks if they now understand what it means to be a fighter. He sharply glances at the one who says no. MC mumbles under his breath about rank and fiends. The leader walks past the people to the hero, looking down at him. He says that it seems MC does not grasp what it means to be a fighter. Tang lowers his head and asks for his name. The hero is tense and cannot say his name as he wonders whether to admit he is on, since no one will believe he was transported here 60 years in the future. The captain looks away in confusion and does not know who would have thought it would be so easy to disrespect a great name. MC is stunned that his leader calls him the namesake of the great fighter on. He places his hand on the hero's shoulder, calling him a total fool since he is not dressed in a fighter's uniform. Continuing to rest his hand on his shoulder, he tells him not to dare insult such a great name. Tang strikes MC in the face, yelling that this is shameful, and flies from the hit to his face and realizes he is still in this frail body, and others say he cannot even avoid the attack and that he merely shares the same name. He crashes into the man. The captain leaves him and says that, during the next fighter trial, he will watch him closely. The fighter stands still as the leader asks if they heard him, after which they reply, yes, and he orders them to head to the trial site. Tang exits the room, stating that the physical trial is starting. The guy sits beside Aang and asks if he is fine, to which Aang responds that he is still alive. He looks uneasy and realizes that MC is truly named On, and he introduces himself as Cadet Lan Senual. The girl from the shadows asks how he dares take the name On. Cadet Lan turns and says he is a foolish boy, asking if, with the same name, he thinks he will be as strong. The girl tosses her hair back and calls him knave. Clenching his teeth in anger, MC asks why the girl is so proud and why she cares about his name. Lan watches her leave and says she may be the most talented cadet in their group. The girl heads for the exit and is also known as the Princess Who Never Smiles, and she belongs to the most renowned martial arts clan in Helios. The hero frowned and wondered why the last name Sita seemed very familiar to him. The cadet helps MC stand and he thanks him. A burst of light lit up the guys. Sujo approaches with a camera and calls it a charming display of male friendship. The girl shyly asks them to ignore her and continue, and frowns at her. The hero's nose began bleeding and he asks her name. Lan points at her camera and asks if she took pictures of them, to which he gets a yes, and MC says he was focusing on the wrong thing. The girl introduces herself as Xiaoyu, smiling. She imagines Lan holding Aang in her arms and says she was charmed by their male friendship, finding it appealing. Su looks at the camera and laughs, adding that the photos turned out well, and the hero calls her a fool. The fighters stand at the site of the physical trial, and opens his fist and thinks that despite this body he is still the mightiest fighter, believing that, after seeing his great results, his rivals will be stunned. The cadets prepare to run, and the judge raises his hand announcing the first trial, an endurance race. The gun fires and the command to march sounds. The hero dashes forward quickly, thinking he will take first place and set a record. MC runs to the finish line when the judge calls him the record holder, adding that he took last place, breaking the record for the worst performance ever. The hero collapses, tired and cannot believe he finished last, blaming his body. The judge announced to the fighters that the second trial will test their arm strength, but he takes last place and says he twisted his wrist. MC jumped half as far as Lu in the third long jump trial. The blonde, crossing her arms, calls him a fool. The hero holds his head in fear when he hears he is last overall and believes this is the worst result ever, so he might be expelled. Lan sits beside MC and feels sorry for him, and Soyo is sad that this is the last time she can photograph them. The gym teacher points at Anne, asking Tang if MC is going to the second trial because such a terrible result could lead to immediate expulsion. Closing his eyes, the captain says that, despite his poor results, he has the right to join the second stage of the trial, but it will likely be his last. Tang leaves, ordering the second stage to begin, and the judge listens. The loudspeaker on the tower announces the start of the second stage, and looks up and hears that the second stage will be a compatibility test with emerging technique. A smile forms on the hero's face. MC steps forward when the tower calls everyone to the trial site, and he thinks he has a chance to win this test. And in the fighter's body recalls how 60 years ago he had the best synchronization level, about 96%. A fire ignites in the hero's eyes, and he says that physically this body is weak, but synchronization relies on willpower. With an angry face, he approaches the fighters and thinks they will not mock him now, and he will show them what the synchronization level of the mightiest fighter looks like. The cadets stand inside the room, and looks at his hands in confusion and asks if this is how merging is done in the future, thinking it will be simpler. The screen shows that Lu passed the test with a synchronization level of 39%, which shocks MC. Tubes are attached to the girl's body, and this is considered the best result of the year because martial arts clans have very different results. Sweat drips down Lu's face, and she is called the Princess Who Does Not Smile, and looks down on those who say they want to win her over and that she is radiant, calling them foolish admirers. A green crystal glows on Lu's body. She proudly tosses her hair back and walks away. Her feet descend the stairs, and others say this is worthy of the strongest recruit this year. After all, she is from a martial arts clan and trained hard since childhood. The blonde walks toward the exit and others discuss her, thinking it is just talent, what hairstyle suits her better, and that she has great potential, while they are just here to fill numbers. A knock sounds in the restroom, and this is called an unreachable skill level. Steam escapes Lu's mouth. The girl leans against the door as guys behind her say this is a good result and one of them surely impressed her. The blonde waves her hands at herself and says to herself that, though she does not care about so many admirers, it is thrilling, and she tries to calm down, and holds his face with his hand and says he is amazed by how she achieved 39% synchronization during the test. Lan looks at MC and says that if she is strong in body, she is also strong in spirit. The cadet adds that he can sense this power in her small frame, and also felt she is strong. The guy turns to the hero and says that for some reason he is not worried at all, but gets the reply that he is already used to it. The cadet asked, puzzled in what sense he is used to it. The guy winced in pain since during the test many cadets who faced the merging technique for the first time often felt pain. The fighter fell to the floor, and the man beside him says his result is 12% since when you go through merging for the first time, the body is very tense, and you must endure the force from the fiend's core. The girl threw her head back and screams that she quits since some cannot bear such pain. Lan stands connected to wires and is told he passed the test with a result of 24%, and the required synchronization result is 10%. Suyo holds the phone, and the results of some were surprising. Behind the girl's back they say her result is 30%, and she passed the test. Tang stands with expectation, saying that this time among the cadets there are some promising ones. The girl professor confirms his words, saying that Soyo succeeded. And this time there are already 6 cadets whose synchronization level reached 30% or more compared to other C-class cities. Looking at the commander, the girl says their cadets are quite good. The captain frowns thoughtfully. They look at the cadets from above, and Tang says there are also some who are not so good, and heads to the stairs. He holds his shoulder, flexing his muscles as MC rises. The other cadets laugh at him and say that with his weak build, he will spit blood from the effort because he was last in all prior tests. Standing up, the hero ignores their laughter and says they have never seen anything like this before. With a wicked grin, he tells them to brace themselves because it is his turn. The man near the workers checking the device and picking a red core. The worker reached out to the chosen core and said that the cores they get on the battlefield are split into 6 types. Cores of different colors stood for different things, and the most precious cores were purple. It was responsible for the skill of controlling illusions, and black, which managed time and space, was the rarest, and stood in a special area, preparing to receive the chosen artifact. He placed the stone into the slot in his chest, and synchronization started. The guy looked down and thought that the key is willpower. The stone was in the slot. The guy's body was covered with nerves, and the scientist said that the artifact decides how much stress from the fiend's core he can handle, and how much he can control it. The guy's chest burned and the merging began. A man in a white suit held a hose and asked if he was ready, to which he got a yes. The guy sat in the restroom and a red glow was visible from the window. The white-haired girl looked out the glass and thought about the strong reaction. The guys watched and used the core, and she did not understand where such energy came from. The hero frowned and thought everyone should watch him, and he will show them the synchronization level of the mightiest fighter. The guys observed the process and were amazed. The workers were cautious and one asked if the synchronization was ongoing and questioned how he reached 40% so fast. The hero smiled and recalled how he once reached 96%. He looked ahead and the hose connected to his chest shone brightly. He leaned forward and could push further. The wires hung wrapped in energy. Energy began to form around the guy, gaining percentages, and everyone in the room grew anxious. The blonde touched the wall with his hand. He was stunned and thought this was a mistake because such a high synchronization level cannot be, and the girl behind him said it was still rising, reaching 80%. One of the guys at a table in the crowd did not understand what tricks he was using, and looked ahead with arms spread and thought he should be honored like a king because he is the mightiest fighter, and if not for this weak core and frail body, he could make everyone bow. His gaze froze. He began to collapse, and energy reached for him. He grinned and did not understand where all the energy went. The machine started to spark. A black substance came from his mouth. The hero knelt, saying this body could not handle such a load, and the scientist did not understand what happened and thought there was a fault in the equipment. The hand reached for the guy with the tablet, who said the synchronization level dropped to 10%. The captain stood next to the girl, who said they found a broken core and thought it was faulty, causing the error. The blonde man exhaled and said nothing significant. He looked aside and asked if the final result was 10%, to which she replied yes, and the guy passed the test. The man watched as 2 workers hovered over the victim. The people watched as they revived Anne and discussed how it could not have been more than 10%. The guy sat beside the hero and asked about his state. The gray-haired girl looked through the glass and thought about it. She closed her eyes, made a cross sign, and shouted that everyone worried for nothing, and she had decided there was at least someone better than her in this city. He was carried in their arms, and he thought he could not believe he now had to argue with those kids, but luckily, he passed the test. The hero sat in the restroom and tried to figure out what happened. He recalled the moment when his energy was instantly drained. He grinned and reasoned that he could reach 80% by willpower, and even the most damaged core should not fail. The dark-haired man looked at the opening door. The man entered and ordered everyone to stand ready. The captain stood in the doorway with his aide. He crossed his arms behind his back and congratulated everyone who passed the final trials. He frowned and said the final trial would be practical. The guy stood before the creature, and the fair-haired man said they would face a fiend for the first time in their lives. The guys were excited, and he hoped everyone would get through safely. The squad leader ordered them to line up and go. The captain stood by, saying he felt very bad. The bearded man was silent and looked at the victim. He saw something red near the bench. The man approached and picked up the object. A red gem was in his palm, and he was silently thoughtful. The fair-haired man turned to the guy and said he was growing more curious about what he could show. The hero ran forward. The captain looked in his direction and eagerly awaited the next stage of the blind hunt. The bird flew over the crowd. It soared over the entrance they ordered to open. The feather fell to the floor. A bright glow was visible from under the door. People watched the door open and gazed at the sun, and the man beside him said this was his first time outside the city walls, and so, 60 years later, everyone lives in such closed cities. Light fell on people, and the person in charge of the trial said it was quiet outside the city walls, and they could go out, and if there was time they needed to check the gear so they at least knew how the guys died. The hero touched the core and thought he was given a new one, but he does not think the issue was in it, because, when the energy vanished, it felt like something inside him rejected it. He stepped on the ground. The hero tensed and froze. The wave from his step spread. It moved forward. The vibration reached nearby areas. It reached the creatures. The beings ran to the side. The wave approached the cave. It rushed inside. Nothing was visible in the cave, and the effects of the step surged there. Among bones and skulls sat a creature. The monster was alert. It opened its mouth wide and sensed someone stronger than it, and looked scared and thought he had just seen a fiend, and for a moment, it felt like something inside responded. He looked down and was asked if he was coming. The white-haired girl stood behind him. The guy scratched his head, asked again, and apologized. The brunette stood beside him and asked what was wrong with him. The man called to the team and said these four would work from behind and in a group. The leader stood by the crowd and said everyone was ready. The pink-haired girl looked at MC and asked if this was the plan for working in a team, to which she got a no. The white-haired girl walked ahead and told them not to block her path. Blue-eyed looked forward and thought she was very scared that no one would want to work with her in the team. A comrade stood beside Aang and offered to go because he would need to give his all. The girl held a camera and took a photo, wishing everything would work out for them. In the wasteland there was an obelisk built from a single rock, made of a substance that clears the fog. The leader stood before the team and spoke about the third trial and hoped everyone understood the goal, because it was a blind hunt. He stood near the aid and ordered everyone to split into groups and said each would get a dagger and a small device made of the same rock as the obelisk. The man held a flask with a black core and said their task was very simple. At the entrance, there was a bright red object, and the leader said they would enter the foggy area and go to the designated spot to set up the device to clear the fog. The battle sign was by the point, and it said then the hunt for lower, ranked fiends would begin, and each person's performance would be judged by individual skills and teamwork. The fiends looked ahead, and hunting blindly was the fear of any beginner, which all had to overcome in this fog-covered world. The guys went to the designated spot, and they had to fight unknown dangers hidden in the fog. The team ran forward and creatures watched them, and to become a fighter, you need more than just physical training and experience. The dark-haired man held a flask, and it was unknown how they would act when facing danger, but working as a team they could overcome fear. The beings surrounded the guys. Fiends opened their mouths, and the students had to hunt and destroy everyone in their way. People stood by the body of a creature, and after the first kill of a creature they became fighters. The students stood at the door. The trial began while the leader called a new group. The girl looked at the students and noticed there were many more. Xiao stood and said she was chasing her own goals and was only interested in Lu. The red-haired girl looked ahead. She turned to the people beside her and asked their thoughts. Joel put his hand on his jaw and said she was from a martial arts clan with good training and great potential. Tang crossed his arms and suggested watching one more person, and spread his hands before the guys. The dark-haired man smiled. The fair-haired man looked down, recalling how he saw the broken crystal and thought he checked the core, and it was fine and did not understand what happened then. The girl knocked on his head. The blue-eyed woman looked at the man and asked about his thoughts. The captain looked at the girl and said she cannot call him there, and the dark-haired man said only she can make him blush. Xiao looked away and said they know fiends are divided into ranks and only low-ranking fiends prepared by them should be at the testing grounds, to which the other asked her not to worry. The city was in a wasteland with a nearby forest, and the captain said that for the safety of today's trial, they had watched for days to ensure no first-ranked fiends were near the city. Joel looked ahead and said that, even if they appeared, they would do everything to protect their future fighters. A battle happened in the distance. The bright daytime sky, someone's voice shouted that the trial for this group was over. The master stood before the fighters and exclaimed that the site was ready, and the next group needed to prepare. They discussed that this is Lu's group, and Aang is in it too. Lan stands beside the main character Sewell, a blonde, while warming up his fists, and the brunette declares it is their turn. He passes the capsule to another fighter. Someone grabs it from Aang's hands. He looks at his empty palm in shock. Lu moves away from them and shouts to chase her because they can only stare, and unclenches his teeth and says she is a little bragger. The heroes run forward yelling to keep up. Lu prepares to leap. She is not visible on the ground. She jumps above the heroes and flips in the air. She flies toward the target with the capsule and knife in her hands. The heroine hits the red button. She presses it with her whole body, lowering her head. Xiao says with a smile that, even with a green health core, he moves as well as with a blue agility core, adding surprise about the offspring of martial arts clans. The toothy red creatures glare angrily at the heroes. 3 mutants charge toward Lu, who holds a sword, and furiously yells at Lan that it's time to begin. He replies that he understands. The hero gets into a stance and prepares to dash quickly. They hurriedly head to aid the heroine, to whom the creatures are running. Lan lands right in front of her and punches the ground. Large cracks form in it. His hand grips a knife and he is ready to battle the red mutants. He strikes them and they scatter in different directions. Tang grins and says it was good, and he has adapted to the core. A combat knife spins in the fighter's hand, and sees creatures diving from above and shouts for Sergio and Lu to kill them one by one. The pink-haired girl replies with a smile that she understands. The white-haired girl is also confident in this command. They prepare to leap, pushing off the ground. Lan holds an energy shield. Wang Lu Suo fly with knives toward the enemies. A window appears with a notice that the first round between the pink-haired girl and the fiends has begun. She boldly heads toward them. The girl, smiling, delivers a strike, after which the creature flies aside. She hits the mutant several times with a knife and slices its flesh. So Jo stands with her feet on its body. She pushes off and the mutant flies aside. He quickly falls to the ground. Lan punches the creature in the stomach with his fists. It flies aside. The enemy slides along the ground, leaving a long trail of dirt. Joel, looking down from above, is surprised that the two work well together. He stands beside Tang and Xiao with a smirk, stating that the girl moves more smoothly using the agility core, while the blonde is annoyed asking where he is looking. A window appears, announcing the second round between Lu and the creatures. The enemy is reflected in the girl's eyes. She leaps, raises her sword above herself, and prepares a strike. She forcefully pierces the flesh of the creature. The mutant's body is covered in green light, and it screams in pain. While the heroine continues to deal damage, she jumps off the defeated creature and slides along the ground. The heroine wishes for the slain enemy to burn. She proudly walks forward while a loud explosion of green is heard behind her. The third round between the hero and the creature is announced. He swiftly charges forward with a knife in his hands, stabbing the enemy, and confidently looks ahead and thinks he will first target the 3 most vulnerable spots. He makes a cut across the throat, and the creature screams in pain. He thrusts the blade into the heart, then his tool swiftly slices through the foe's stomach and darts toward the earth, while his beaten rival collapses before him. The champion tumbles while the beast glides on the rocks and snaps his blade on the ground and ponders that the bursting strength of this weak frame is small, and he should seize this opportunity and test what it can do. He adopts a battle pose, readying to dash. Crimson glow streams from the champion's eyes and he zooms rapidly toward the foe. The scarlet beast lifts a mighty fist above itself and prepares to strike the champion and evades his arm. In fury, the hero retaliates and stabs the creature's skin with a blade. He earnestly believes he's moving too sluggishly. The beast strikes back and attempts to harm with its leg, but the hero ducks in time. In motion, he grabs a fighting blade. In anger, readies another hit to the foe. He punctures the beast's skin and thinks he's acting too erratically. The creature's long teeth are gritted in agony. The scarlet beast aims to strike back with its clawed paw. Aang's blade zooms toward the foe. They try to injure each other simultaneously. The hero boldly strikes him, cutting through the skin, and thinks he lacks bursting strength and zips off and slides along the earth, while the huge beast tumbles. The hero spins his fighting blade in his hands while the others observe his moves. Sulio grips a phone in his hands, standing beside Lo in a surprise field. The lad says that Anne appears to be toying with the foe. The pink-haired lass claims she recorded everything, and the white-haired lass thinks he's a show-off, because he's intentionally flaunting. Joel and the others watch what's happening from above. The lass says the lean lad has great strength. The teacher replies that it's not about power but about how he shifts. Tang gazes down with a grim look. The scarlet beast is sprawled on the ground, bleeding while the hero is panting warily. Drops of sweat are trickling off him, and he says this is the finish, sadly realizes that in this frame he cannot use any of the abilities from before, and there's also breathlessness at the slightest motion. He shifts his leg and says he has finished his test. The hero quickly dashes toward the bleeding beast and announces it's time to end him. A crimson gem begins to rise from the earth between them. The hero stares at what's happening in shock. A red spike pierces the beast's frame, and it zips to the side. The champions look around and don't grasp why they're encircled by tree tendrils. Someone's hand emerges from below. 2 palms with claws appear from the rear of the scarlet beast. The being roughly rips him apart and zips out. An watches in horror what's occurring. Green blood splashes around. A head of another being surfaces from the creature's skin. It bellows fiercely, opening its mouth full of sharp fangs. The crimson fog spreads toward the fortress. Tang and the red-haired heroine see it before them. The bearded teacher realizes what's happening in alarm. He shuts his eyes in fear and lowers his gaze. Tang, observing what's occurring from above, yells at the top of his lungs that this is a top-tier demon. All the warriors retreat in fear, hearing the command to return behind the city barriers. Joel and Xiao swiftly head toward them, leaping off the fortress wall. They land heavily. Bits and dust scatter around. A large dust cloud rises. Xiao, with a bold and calm expression, hurries to aid the champions. She yells, demanding they not panic because it's safe near Captain Tang and he will help them reach the city barriers. The champions stare at the being in terror, while he asks about humans and demons. An watches in panic, asking if any of them have the strength of a daemon and what they're discussing. The beast asks with a frightening grin if it's him. He strides toward the champions, emitting crimson dust that scatters to the sides. Lu stands beside the scared Lan and Xiao and says he's not at all like the lesser demons. The last pictures herself completely frozen by branches and realizes they'll be finished in a few moments. The beast leans over the frightened hero, who realizes this frame will definitely not withstand a top-tier demon. He gazes at the foe in fear and realizes he feels this for the first time, and regular fighters often say they feel a sense of despair when facing a demon. The beast extends its claws and says he'll take a look now. Crimson orbs appear on his hand and he orders the champions to be bound. The rays strike each character. A mark burns on their foreheads and they begin to collapse. The top-tier demon holds his hand before him, and the champions have fallen to the earth. The beast hears the ground split and sees the shapes forming below. Joel and Xiao break through the stones and zoom into the battlefield. The teacher furiously shouts, demanding they not touch them. The beast looks at them with a smirk and says like this. Huge branches form around him, while the champions try to reach him in time, but he says farewell. His face is pulled by the tree trunks. He sinks into the earth and says, see you later. The red-haired lass looks down with Joel and asks if he really took the 4 trainees with him. The tree trunks are visible from under a huge hole in the ground. The outlines of the teachers are visible near it. Joel angrily orders them to follow him. Green grass in the middle of the wasteland. The wary champions stand near the dug-up soil, and the last says the tracks stop here. Shio sadly says they checked everything recently, but why didn't they notice the presence of a top-tier demon then, since Tang was usually careful in this matter? The dug-up soil cools while the hero states this has never happened before. A stranger zooms from above and calls their name. Tang lands beside them and asks if they found the lads. He eagerly learns why they stopped, since the teachers must continue the chase. Joel points down and asks him to calm down since the tracks end here. Tang touches the rocks, while Xiao explains that the demon went deeper underground, and they don't know what lies ahead, so it's risky to go there. The teacher touches the soil with his fingers. A memory appears in which the demon steals the child, who calls for his brother. Tang hits the ground with all his might, exclaiming and cursing the villain. He looks down tiredly and declares it's his fault, because he didn't notice the danger. Joel and Xiao stand beside a devastated Tang, who is certain this is all his fault. The blue-haired teacher looks down with regret, hinting they should return, as there's probably chaos in the city. Jio sadly hears that without the three of them, things will be even worse, and after all, they'll send a scouting team to check the areas around the city to ensure no other top-tier demons are there. The last places her hand on his shoulder and addresses Tang, comforting him that none of them wanted this to happen, but they need to stay calm, noting she understands how hard it is for him. His fingers touch her hand. He rises and orders them to return and he'll take a look. Joel exclaims with displeasure, not believing he's serious. Xiao stops his colleague with her hand and tells Tang to return before sunset. He turns around and says with a serious expression that he understands. Tang hurries away from the champions into the mist. The last stands beside Joel, who scratches his head, explaining they can't stop him. He in turn answers that he knows, because when his younger brother was dragged away by demons, he blamed himself a lot. She looks down with regret and says that if his brother had survived, he'd now be the same age as the trainees. The beautiful daytime sky. The last says they remind Tang of his brother. The action takes place in a dark cave. Tied up, On looks around and doesn't understand where they are. He looks at all the champions tied to the poles and realizes they're still alive. The top-tier demon places his claws near him and asks if the main character has woken up. The lad, scared, quickly turns his head in his direction. The beast stands nearby and looks at the frightened one, who thinks this is a top-tier demon. The main character tries to break free, while he's told he quickly woke up, and likely he's different. The demon stands right in front of them and finds him very interesting, and is shocked to see a hand coming toward him. The demon hits him on the head so hard that the pillar shatters into pieces. He approaches the hero and asks why he's giving off his strength, since he's only a human and can't be stronger than the demon. And, covered in blood, asks him with a smirk what he's talking about, insulting the beast along the way. Suddenly, the hero breaks free from the bindings and the top-tier demon zips to the side, and lands on his feet on the ground. He grabs a fighting blade. The hero deals a strong blow to the demon. The beast gains power and calls the enemy quick. The demon strikes with his hand but then jumps up and dodges it. The hero maintains a battle stance watching the foe. He looks down tiredly and realizes that in his past life, he would have managed to slice off the head faster than the demon could react, and sees his friends unconscious and is sure they need to be saved. The hero quickly dashes toward the top-tier demon. He examines the beast and realizes it's a demon with a red core, nimble, flexible, with fast reaction and attack speed, and its joints aren't protected by a tough shell, and it seems that's its weak spot. The beast stretches its scary hand toward him, declaring it's not worth doing this. The hero tries to dodge its claws. The demon grabs Anne, who in turn grits his teeth in anger. The beast pierced the lad's shoulder with its claws, and he thought about finding the moment, and swung and thought about the weak spot. He hit the demon in the joint with his blade. The hero grinned and grabbed him by the limb. The hero tore off his foe's hand. The white-haired one opened his mouth wide and groaned in pain. The hero smiled and said he shouldn't be underestimated, and in his time he destroyed many top-tier demons. Fane looked down and muttered something. In one motion, he hit the lad with his knee. The warrior's face changed and he spat out blood. The beast looked forward and the fighter flew in that direction. The smoke cleared and a crack in the wall was visible, and was lying near the crater. The foe's hand was growing back, and he said he knew the weak spots, but he was like a tree, and his core was a mix of red and wood. The hand grew back, and the demon said he was already fine. The hero was bleeding and thought about how he was healing his wounds, though only demons with a green healing core can do this. They can restore his damage, and he thought about what was said. The hero looked down in shock and thought about how demons have advanced over these 50 years. The foe was stretching his wrist and said that in the end, he had been underestimated. He extended his hand and beckoned to him with a claw. The spikes pierced them. See, the lad's body was pulled toward the beast. He caught the man by the head. The lad looked at the demon through his fingers, and looked down, and the beast said he couldn't understand what was wrong with him. The fighter had blurry vision and assumed he had touched his organs and felt awful pain even from a breath, and didn't want to die just having got here. The hero's friends were tied behind the foe, and he realized this meant they'd die too. The man lay among the bodies, and the hero said they'd die just like his comrades from his past life, who fought side by side with him. The hero looked down and apologized. He looked down and said it was unfair and was unhappy with the ending. The demon looked at the foe and asked if he was dead, noting he was very fragile. The beast opened its mouth and thought about evolving and wondered if it would work if it ate him. It opened its mouth wide and wanted to consume the mortal body, and woke up and looked ahead. The beast looked at the lad, who was asking about his plans. Energy began to be absorbed into the hero and the foe was watching. The dark-haired one looked down and said he couldn't die yet, otherwise the whole plan would fail. The stone was cracked, crystal pieces fell, and he said he'd never have thought he'd have to use his last strength for this and in such a place. The fanged one looked away and didn't understand what it was and felt the heavy atmosphere. Energy was gathering around the hero, and the foe was wondering what rank he was. The core glowed and the lad groaned. The stone was absorbing mana, and he assumed it was rank 6. His hands turned red and claws formed. The legs transformed into demonic ones. The hero became a demon and fully healed his wounds. There was a click, the magic ray hit the ground, and the demon covered his head with his hands. The ray pierced the earth. The creatures watched what was happening. The shock wave melted the flesh of all living things. The dome left nothing alive. The blow spread throughout the area, and the ray rushed into the sky. In the crater a demon was visible, which was absorbing power. The white-haired one looked at his foe and said he was the only one of his kind, the 8th rank and the strongest demon with a red core, and said he was their king. The gray-haired one looked up and repeated what he said, and looked to the side and ordered him to kneel. The creature fell to the floor. The hero spread his wings and flew down, ordering his name to be spoken. The demon trembled and spoke the demon's name. The Crimson Fin King looked ahead. Broken houses stood on the wasteland. The man jumped over obstacles. The captain looked ahead and prepared to pounce. The creature watched as Tang rushed forward. The blond man was behind the lizard. He kicked it in the torso, and the shock waves spread out to the sides, while another beast approached them. The commander braced himself for the blow. The warrior raised his leg up. The man kicked the beast back with all his might. He held his hand and, looking at the corpses, said there were only 2 low-ranking demons in this area, and the lads were nowhere to be seen. The man looked up, and he had to continue searching and find them before sunset. He looked at the pinkening sky. The captain became wary and a ray formed behind him. The shock wave spread out across the area. Tang covered his eyes with his hand and asked about the energy wave. He looked at the smoke and assumed the students were there. Smoke was pouring out of a huge hole. The Crimson Fen King was approaching his subordinate, and claws were visible on his leg. He landed beside him. The king stood in front of the demon and he spoke to him. The white-haired one scratched his head and said he didn't know he'd have to transform in such a hole. The fanged one looked up and was asked to answer. He narrowed his eyes and asked if there were 5 more demon kings left after he vanished. The figures of the rulers were visible behind him. The demon lowered his head and said now there were only 5 demons and nothing had changed. The hero smiled and said it seemed they had found a common language. He smiled and laughed. His hand began to gain strength, and he asked if everyone had forgotten what they had done 60 years ago. The hero looked at the hands and said they had chosen the body of the strongest warrior of humanity, but he didn't think at this time it would be so weak. The light fell on him, and he said because of this, he had to spend the last of his strength to sort out this mess, and the next time he'd be able to transform would be when he was fully strong. His hand was shaking, and he raised his head up. He held his jaw and said this was testing his patience, and he'd have to wait until the strongest warrior learned to control demonic memories. The servant looked at the floor and said these memories gave them the chance to evolve. The king stood under the open sky and said demonic fins show power. He walked away from the subordinate and said when a creature grows a fin, then this is the result of growth, because this is a trait of their kind and the reason why they always outdo other creatures, and this human warrior is very similar to those. Fang looked ahead and pictured how he nodded to his brother, and this was needed for growth. The dark-haired man closed his eyes and needed to absorb higher-ranked demons and learn demonic memories. The ruler was lit by light and said he would grow. He turned back and said it would be a gift. The subordinate looked up and said he admired the plan and asked to help him by becoming a loyal aide. He extended his hand and asked to help awaken the power. Crimson Fin King dealt a strong blow. There was slime on his face, and he said he was not worthy. He beckoned to him with his finger, and said the only thing he was good for was to become the one who would awaken the memories in a person. The body stood in front of him without the upper part. Cells were floating near the DNA, and the white-haired man turning to the man said he took the first steps for him. The red-bodied man looked at the gene code and asked not to let him down. He smiled and said he needed him to slowly reach the 8th rank and fell out of the demon's body. The cell with the genes was placed in the core compartment. The lad sat in front of the tied-up lads, and the demon said only then would he wake up from sleep. The stone began to gain energy. The cells moved through the blood and were in the lad's body. Crimson Fin King covered his wings and was immersed in sleep. The hero was touched by hands. They absorbed him. The warrior was lying on the floor and calling out to the commander. He looked away and didn't want to die. The man extended his hand and said he wouldn't die, and they'd be able to escape. They took each other's hands. The facial expression froze and they all died. The man with the red eye looked toward him and they asked him why he survived. The lad stood up and stretched his hand forward. He put his palm on his head and calmed down, realizing it was a dream. The sun was shining through the window, and he realized it was a memory. The man opened the curtain, and they called out to Anne, stood in front of him, and were glad he woke up. The pink-haired lass approached him, and he got scared. She looked at the hero and asked what happened to the lad's hair. The hero was in an awkward spot, and asked what she was talking about and thought it was too close. He looked at his comrades and asked if everything was okay, to which they said everything was fine. The captain stood behind the curtain and said he still remembered something. He pulled the fabric to the side. Tang put his hands on his hips and said they should tell about the situation in the cave. The blond man stood in front of the hero, who asked why he was here and thought about the other commanders who were at the walls. The red-haired lass pointed at the bearded man and said he was the one who brought everyone here. The man was angry and asked not to call him that. The trio overheard and repeated. Joel sat beside him and said he had found them in a cave, lying on the ground at the entrance to the cave, and everyone was unconscious. The lads were lying in front of the commander-in-chief, and they were lucky the demon wasn't nearby, otherwise it's unlikely they'd have been able to return safely. Gio pointed to Anne and said the other three had already woken up, but didn't remember anything, and he was the only one who had lain there for so long and had also changed. She held a mirror up to him, and the lad saw a white strand, and the woman said he had just mentioned the cave, and asked him to recall what had happened there. The lad looked at the hair and understood what she was talking about, and didn't know how this had happened, and didn't feel reality. The beast was hitting him in the body, and he only remembered how he was attacked, but what happened next was already vague. He was pierced by branches. He put his hand to his eye and thought about whether to tell them everything, including the transfer, and decided it would be better to stay in Anne's personality. He looked ahead and said he only remembers a few seconds when he woke up and saw they were dragged into the cave, then he passed out, and then everything was in a fog until he woke up. The bearded man looked and was silent, thinking about what he was thinking. He remembered seeing huge blood stains on the wall. Gio rolled up to the lad on a chair and clarified his name. He leaned against the wall and said he was named after their greatest warrior and that, despite his poor shape, he fought calmly. He looked at the student and asked if he had fought demons before. The hero was scared and said he had always been curious about this and independently gathered and studied the weaknesses of demons. The redhead stood beside the captain and said such a dedicated warrior needs to be well trained, and the lad thought about it. He began to worry and asked about the results of the tests. The pink-haired lass smiled and said he passed, and they were on the same team. The brunette scratched his head and said the captain united them, because the test united the team and they'll work together. The white-haired lass looked away and said they were far behind the others. The hero looked away and asked if they were behind the other teams. Tang looked at him and said teams should earn points by completing tasks, and while he was in a coma, their team's point balance stayed at 0. The hospital was in the town, and the entire area could hear the query about the length of the coma. The silver-haired girl fixed her curls, the dark-haired boy touched his shirt, the pink-haired girl tightened her shoelaces, and Aang put on his mittens. People were shocked. The group strolled down the road, and folks were murmuring about them. The leader glanced at the team and said that he would explain everything simply, and to start, praise them for joining the ranks of fighters. The students looked at him and paid attention, they gazed forward, and he said that they endured the meeting with the monster, which he also praised them for. He looked forward and said that, as mentioned before, now the 4 of them were one unit under his command, and he had 9 groups in total and hoped that they would prove themselves. Aang raised his arm and asked again, thinking that the present system among fighters was much more bothersome than in his time, when they earned their place among fighters through combat and skill. The dark-haired boy turned aside and asked if he had heard about the ranking of junior teams, to which Aang asked again. The silver-haired girl put her hands behind her back, and it seemed the newcomer didn't grasp anything, and at the moment their team was at the very bottom of the list. And the boy thought that it shouldn't be like that. Tang looked forward and showed the group chart, and said that proving yourself means climbing the list, and as a leader responsible for them, he is required to ensure that they earn as many points as possible, and there are 9 teams in his group, which means that they have as many as 8 rivals. The commander stood over the chart, and the light-haired boy said that the ranking is raised due to missions, and every month, 3 leaders, including him, pick 2 top teams and a total of 6 top ones are chosen, and for competing in battles you can gain prizes for first place. The sun lit up the road, and in the same way the last team of each leader had to be disciplined. The team tidied up, and it was a temporary downgrade to cleaners until the next month until it is refreshed. The hero glanced around and said that it was exhausting, but at least it was clear why it was so neat, to which the leader said that people improved better this way, and since monsters advanced, they should not fall behind. The silver-haired girl held her hands behind her back, while the bearded man said that in their team, Lo would be the leader because she earned the most points in the hybrid test. The team looked at her and agreed, and the boy thought about why not him because he was the strongest fighter and a respected ruler. The man took a step, the girl stood forward and said that it was essential to finish the mission. The sun was glowing over the buildings. Tang turned around, saying that they needed to notice others, and that they could check what missions were on the board. He looked down and said that their new uniforms needed to be tried in a real fight, and said that they could reach him if needed. The man departed, saying, "Freely." The girl went to the side and said that they needed to check the missions because they had already lost 3 days. The pink-haired girl ran after her and said that they had forgotten something vital. The blue-eyed girl looked back and asked about it. Thinking over the possibilities in her mind, the girl pulled out a camera and said that they forgot to take the first official picture of the team. The leader looked at her and was quietly thoughtful. Aang grinned and the team was united. He smiled and it was not bad. There was a group of kids in the picture. The leaders were standing on the rooftop, and after asking why they were staring at him like that, the red-haired girl said that he claimed that there was not a single monster near the cave, only signs of an explosion, and inside the cave, there were only puddles of blood from an unknown source. Geo held a lighter in his hands and lit a cigarette. He looked aside and asked if this was really the work of 4 kids. The bearded man paused thoughtfully and then said that Aang was very odd and doubtful to him. Tang looked down, presenting the hero, and said that his instinct told him that something was wrong with him, and that he seemed to sense a foul odor. Jiao hugged him and said that he was overthinking, and that the main thing was that the kids had returned home. He was upset and said that he was speaking earnestly, to which she said that the team was promising and asked them to coach them well and try not to fail. The blue-haired man sighed, holding his hand in front of him. He stood beside him and said that they needed to watch, and if he noticed anything strange, then let him inform them. The team was standing at the mission board. The hero looked and said that there were 3 A-level missions, and for completing each level, you can earn 10 points. The boy stood beside him and told him that these were the toughest missions. The silver-haired girl looked away and was quietly thoughtful. The dark-haired boy stood in front of the scales with a challenging high mission, and said that when doing the toughest missions, urgent situations often occur. Aang closed his eyes and understood everything. He stood in front of the girl and thought. The girl ripped off all 3 sheets of paper. They both said that they would take everything. The hero's team dashed through the woods. The boy touched the red gem on his chest. After that, it began to shine, and golden lines extended from it. The young man turned around, noticing something like nano wings on his suit. He suddenly surged forward. Aang turned around and leaned his back against a rock on the path. Electricity ran through his arm, and the hero mentally noted that when the nano wings vanished, they turned into a weapon. A blade appeared in his hand. The dark-haired boy looked at it in surprise and was pleased that great advances had been made in technology in 60 years. The team hid behind a rock, and the blonde asked if everyone was prepared, to which she received a positive answer. There were 2 low-ranking monsters in front of them, and Lu declared that they needed to be defeated with 1 strike. The girl frowned and ordered them to move as planned. The fighters suddenly leaped out from behind cover. The creatures noticed the ambush and ran toward the heroes. They showed their teeth and growled, getting closer and closer. The blonde frowned and thought that she couldn't mess up here because she still had 3 more A-class tasks to complete. Lan stepped firmly on the ground in front of the enemies, preparing to block their view. He swung his leg, creating a stone barrier that shielded them from the attack. The creatures looked at the obstacle that had appeared in surprise. Lu, picturing herself above the chessboard, thought that now Aang and Suji should restrain the monsters. The partners were approaching the creatures from both sides. They swung together. The hero and Suji delivered several slicing blows and ended up behind the monsters. The dark-haired boy narrowed his eyes and chuckled to himself that it wouldn't be easy for the enemies now that their joints had been cut. The creatures fell to their knees with a roar. Lan, standing in front of them, clenched his fist to test his strike. He forcefully attacked the monsters from below, right in the jaws. The attack threw the opponent's back, and Lu was already waiting there. The girl swung her arm, intending to end this fight quickly and elegantly. Her precise movements left a greenish trail in the air. The blonde landed behind, stabbing the dagger into the ground. The monsters' bodies filled with green light, overloaded with poison. Lu straightened up, and the enemies exploded next to her, marking another brilliant win. Suji leaned over to the rock and noted that the mist was clearing, and the device was working steadily. Lan wiped the sweat from his forehead and breathed a sigh of relief that they finally succeeded, because the task of clearing the mist in the wasteland was much tougher than the test, and it took a long time, so the difficulty was suitable for a class A task. The girl poked the branch into the monster's flesh and finding a crystal exclaimed that they left a red core. She picked it up and happily twirled it in her hand. The blonde closed her eyes, thanking the others for their teamwork and earning 10 points, and the hero looked at the papers and noted that the completed missions were automatically destroyed. Suji showed the chart and explained that currently, points are awarded for defeating monsters, and the tablet system is directly linked to the point ranking chart, so when a mission is completed, the chart in the tablet automatically calculates. She walked up to the boy, reaching out for the leaflets, and muttered that they had just finished the task of clearing the mist on the outskirts of the town, and they could look at the remaining ones. The girl looked in surprise at the missions where you either need to capture 3 lower ranked monsters alive or collect 10 lower, ranked monster cores and noted that everything difficult remains. She dropped to the ground and muttered in despair that they still had 7 cores left, but capturing monsters alive was even tougher, to which Lan laughed, agreeing that it was not that simple this time because while they were completing their mission, the other teams were also busy. Lu came closer and suggested that they discuss the next plan of action. She looked at her comrades firmly and said that they needed to complete 2A class missions and then continue to finish the others of the same level to get ahead. Lan and Suji looked at the leader with admiration, inspired by her speech. The boy looked at the hero and respectfully asked him what he thought, to which the young man asked to address him casually as a friend. Aang stretched his muscles and agreed that they needed to hurry up and earn the required number of points, otherwise the other teams might surpass them. He sighed and thought that he believed his heart could not be moved by anything. The boy smiled, presenting his team, and noted that despite their youth, their determination and persistence were inspiring. The dark-haired boy adjusted his mitten and suggested completing one more task before sunset. The silhouettes of the team stood out against the sunset, and everyone happily supported the idea. Only Lu was unhappy that her idea with an inspiring speech was taken. Birds fluttered and the leaves of the trees rustled in the breeze. Lan tightened the canvas on the creature, exclaiming that he was done tying this one up. He looked at the rest of the monsters that his comrades were working on, and was pleased that they caught 3 as needed. The blonde squeezed her weapon and mentally noted that the tranquilizer darts for catching lower, ranked monsters were also almost gone, and in general, each team did not have much special ammunition. She noticed that the main character was staring at her intently. The girl sighed, guessing that he needed to have everything clarified to him, and told him that this was also a product of nanotechnology, a tranquilizer gun, and a blade for defeating monsters in one package, so it was suitable for beginners and was located next to nano wings, although the functions of creation and use were more complex. The dark-haired boy sat down next to the creatures and noticed that they were already unconscious. He remembered himself in the past to knock out back then, monsters could only be restrained by giving them a beating, and researchers always complained about the poor state of the creatures. Lan put his hands on his belt, and with a smile, suggested starting the transport because the task was successfully finished. The team was standing next to a pile of corpses, and the boy added that he had to defeat such a group of monsters to capture 3. Suji stretched and remembered that all the fighters needed to return to the town before sunset, otherwise there would be a warning. She winked and suggested hurrying home for supper. The hero looked at her in surprise, realizing that he didn't know if his current body had a home in this world. The blonde gathered her weapons and agreed that she needed to return early as well, so it was time to set up signals for the research staff to take these creatures, and then the mission would be over. Something red flashed past the team as the hero was about to say something about the odd feeling. A bullet pierced several creatures that the team had caught. Aang and Lu froze in shock, blood was flowing from the creature's mouth. The weapons were smoking, and an unfamiliar voice said that they shouldn't have taken this mission. The team turned around, asking who it was. A group of people were sitting on a rock, and the shooter recognized the heroes as a rookie team that had taken all the class missions. The boy raised an eyebrow and was upset that they were supposed to do this, and the team took someone else's. Aang frowned and asked who they were. The shooter raised his weapon and replied that they were the Black Gun team that Captain Tang had taken over during the previous test. He looked at the heroes and added that they were, simply put, their predecessors, one of the 9 other teams. The sniper turned to his partner and asked how many teams Tang had taken under his command this time, and she replied that it was 3. The hero and his comrades looked at them with displeasure when the boys stated that they had not shown them due respect. The intruders jumped to the ground. The fighters approached threateningly until their leader added that they could not take all the A-class missions for themselves without consulting their seniors. The opponents lined up, and the red-haired man noted that they were boldly taking advantage of their kindness. Looked at the creature's bullet-riddled body. She froze, not making a sound. The girl gritted her teeth, realizing that they had worked hard to catch these creatures. The shooter raised his eyebrows and asked who their leader was. Instead of answering, the blonde leaped up from her place and rushed toward him. She swung her leg, but the opponent dodged. He jumped back and called them rude cadets. Lu swung her fist and smirked that he called himself an older generation. Lan and Suji grabbed the leader and asked her not to get upset, but to talk to them, because they were higher in rank. The pink-haired girl narrowed her eyes and asked the guests with annoyance what they were doing here and why they shot their creatures. The sniper looked at her mockingly and asked again. His eyes turned bloodshot, and the boy shouted that the reason was rivalry, calling the team simple-minded. Lu trembled in anger and clenched her fists, outraged by such a word, and in her heart, she was upset that the jerks had ruined their mission and also doubted her leadership. Len turned to the hero and asked to talk to them because it was already sunset. A red silhouette ran behind him. Aang jumped over the shooter and clenched his teeth. He kicked him hard in the head. The mask flew off the captain's face and he himself flew back. The dark-haired boy frowned and was upset that they were bullying here, not thinking about how much time and effort was spent on catching 3 creatures, and then thought that he had never heard of such a rule in his life. His comrades looked at him in shock, and only the blonde grinned approvingly. The red-haired man grabbed his face and muttered unhappily that you can't treat your seniors like that. He looked furiously at the hero and ordered the team to prepare for a fight. His comrades armed themselves and moved to attack. Lu swung her blade and said that they would battle to the end. The two teams rushed toward each other. Suddenly a man appeared between them and asked what they were doing here. Tang caught the hero and his opponent before they could strike. The commander crossed his arms, and his eyes sparkled. The man scattered the boys in different directions. The red-haired man turned in the air and skidded to his feet, and thought that there probably wouldn't be a fight, and he wouldn't be able to see the skill of the current generation of fighters. Captain Tang straightened up, surrounded by scarlet energy. He turned around with annoyance and asked if the team really wanted to become a meal for monsters since they were causing trouble here at sunset. The red-haired man pointed at the rivals and shouted that they started it first, and they even took his mask. The blonde looked at him with disdain and smirked that he was acting like a child complaining to the captain. Suji took out a camera and said that she had proof that they were the first to kill the 3 creatures that the team captured alive, and now they were just lying. The man looked at her and asked if they were really carrying out an A-class mission. Lu took a stance and reported that the mission was almost finished, but at the last moment the Black Gun team ruined it. The other man closed his eyes and said he understood. He turned around and said that the heroes might feel like they'd gone too far, but they'd gone through the same thing when they were new. The blonde frowned when the commander added that it was up to them to decide how to handle this. Tang narrowed his eyes and explained that after all teams were judged by their points, and other than deliberate harm and danger anything was allowed since every town had its own rules. Suji and Lan tensed when the man said that as fighters, they would face more hazardous situations, and then he wouldn't be there to separate them. The sun was setting, and the commander added that he was only stepping in because of the sunset, and the team still had to get back to the town. Tang looked at the red-haired man and muttered that he was ashamed of those who had class missions taken away by the rookies and even won in battle, so they should change their attitude toward service. The shooter passed by accepting the advice. He looked at the hero and reminded him that he still hadn't given his name. Aang's eyes flashed and he introduced himself. The opponent froze, and his eyes widened. The boy turned to his comrades and laughed at the fact that the young man was called the strongest fighter of humanity. The red-haired man put his hands in his pockets and promised that they would not give up a single point. He gritted his teeth in annoyance and added that this month, the hero's team would be the worst. The shooter approached the mask and stopped. The boy turned around and, pointing to his cheek, said that he would repay him twice later. Then the fighter picked up the mask from the ground. He secured it on his face and ordered the team to move out. The hero watched as the rivals left. Tang frowned and said that Black Gun wasn't the strongest team, but they were known for their ability, so they would definitely do their best to hinder the team when they did the task. He remembered the red-haired man and added that their captain specialized in weapons. The blonde frowned when she heard that they were good for beginners, but there were other skilled fighters, and they might not have enough strength to fight them. The man turned around and said that it was time to return to the town. Lu closed her eyes, mentally annoyed by the current situation, and ordered the team to move out. She approached the dark-haired boy and asked if he really decided to show off with that trick. The blonde turned away and added that it looked cool. Aang looked at her in surprise. Everyone headed toward the setting sun, and Lan asked if the hero was going to supper, to which he heard that he already had plans. The dark-haired boy cracked his knuckles and thought that he would get 3 creatures for them tonight. A huge moon was glowing over the town. A red light flashed inside the base, and a loudspeaker announced that, for safety reasons, they should not leave the town. The hero crouched down behind the container and thought that on the way to the gates from the town, there were only electric alarms and almost no people because at such a time, you should stay at home, and he would like to go home when he finished. The boy carefully looked out and noticed that the gates were not so well protected. He stopped in front of a sign that said, "Temporary emergency exit, exit forbidden." The dark-haired boy crouched down and thought about why it never occurred to anyone to leave the town at night because before, they did not care about the time of day, and sometimes they even arranged special night missions because it was easier to find creatures. Aang thoughtfully touched his chin and decided that he would use an old method, and then catching 3 creatures would not be hard. The young man remembered the rival team and thought that he just needed to unexpectedly finish the task since the red-haired one was determined to interfere with their team. The dark-haired boy shuddered when he heard a voice nearby. Lu leaned against the wall, surprising the hero, but mentally she was thrilled by the night walk and freedom after becoming a fighter, because the girl immediately understood that her comrade was planning something. Aang lowered his head and muttered that she startled him, and the opponent clarified whether he was really going to go out the gate. The hero looked away and assured that he just went for a stroll after a filling supper, showing that for the strongest fighter, he was slow-witted. The blonde looked at him with disappointment and noted that he did not know how to lie. He ruffled his hair and admitted that he wanted to surprise his comrades and complete the task that they ruined. Aang turned around and added that there was nothing to be done now, and asked not to report it to the captain. The boy's eyes widened when the woman said she would go with him. She smiled and asked about the plan, mentally admiring her own cleverness and anticipating the sour faces of her rivals. The young man turned around and asked if she was joking, but received a negative answer. Someone was on the wall behind her. Two men dangled their legs down and one of them was actually eating supper. The fighter leaned on his arm and muttered that it was deadly dull at the post because there were no crazy people who would want to go out. His partner put his finger to his lips and advised him not to say such a website thing in front of the captain of the third team because the doors were left open in case of emergency. He remembered how several deserters ran to the fortress several years ago for help but were torn to pieces by creatures because the gates were slowed to open. The man vividly recalled the memory of monsters devouring people. Now the gate was slightly open, leaving an emergency exit because, in their world, the most important thing is to survive. The opponent lowered his head and apologized, and the second reassured him that he would get used to it with time. He took a magazine with a half-naked girl on the cover from his pocket and boasted. The young man looked at it eagerly and exclaimed that it was a new issue about fighters from other towns, and his partner said that he paid well to get it and was even ready to share for today. The guard sat looking at the pages and drooling, admiring the female shapes. At that moment, Lu and Ang ran out of the town. The boy rushed forward, noting that they had been tested here, but the mist was even thicker at night than during the day. The dark-haired boy pointed to the side and called his partner. They stopped in a clearing, and the girl noted that they needed to position themselves far from the town walls to remain unnoticed, and the dead forest would provide good cover. The hero looked at her and asked her to wait until he lured the creatures out and then strike them in the head. That should be enough to knock them out. He stepped into the mist, adding that his partner should wait for him here. The blonde's hands trembled when she thought that Ang looked confident, but going alone into the forest covered in mist was risky. The fighter sat down and thought that she had also found something to do in the middle of the night, and now it seemed as if the mist and darkness were about to swallow her up. Lu sighed, realizing that she needed to distract herself from her fear and worry. The blonde firmly drew her eyebrows together, preparing to help the hero at any moment. Ang skillfully lured one creature out of the forest, surprising his partner, and the fact that he caught them one by one made the capture easier. The dark-haired boy jumped up and pushed off the tree, and the girl noted that the method of catching creatures with live bait turned out to be unique and interesting, so you quickly got involved in the process. The boy turned around and called her. Lu ran to the creature at the signal. They both pushed off at the same time to attack. The young man struck from above and his partner from below in the jaw. The blonde jumped and turned in the air, and in general, under the command of the hero, their fight looked like a game with lower-ranking creatures. The boy sat on top of the creature and gave the girl a thumbs up, pleased that the trick forgotten half a century ago worked. Ang and Lu pinned down another enemy from both sides. They tied up the creatures, realizing that this method of catching still requires a lot of physical effort. The dark-haired boy wiped the sweat from his face and noted that this body still needed a lot of practice because in the past, he could catch such creatures in no time. The blonde dragged another creature and said that they had finally caught the third one, and the young man asked to leave it here. The girl thought that this was much tougher than the usual physical training at home. She looked at her partner in confusion and asked again, was it really just to leave it here? The fighter sat down next to the creature in front of her and explained that lower-ranked creatures were foolish enough to not understand how to help their kin, and they also didn't like to go near the town walls, so it was fine to leave the three of them here. The hero patted the creature on the face and added that they wouldn't wake up for a long time after such a head injury, and the team would just come here tomorrow morning and finish the task. Lu looked at him closely and asked how he knew so much. The opponent sweated and realized that he had said too much. The partners raised their heads when a voice from above said that he had found it. Ang and Lu froze at what they saw. There were two creatures sitting on the tree, one of whom giggled that he had found the human. The second one bowed his head and agreed that he could smell him. The blonde sweated, mentally noting that these were first-ranked creatures. The hero frowned, trying to understand where they had even come from, and now was not the time. Beams appeared above the town. 3 leaders landed on the wall where the guards were sitting. Joel looked at them and ordered the searchlights to be turned on because a report of a first-ranked creature had been received. Gio looked at the blonde man and asked if it was the same one from the test, but the man said that the creature was already dead in the cave. The beam lit up 2 creatures on the edge of the forest. They were sitting on a tree, and the fighter informed the captain that the target had been found, but there were 2 of them. Jiao frowned, not understanding what had caused such creatures to appear, and ordered the town gates to be closed and the defensive weapons to be prepared. The cannons lit up, ready to attack. The man opened his mouth and ordered the gates not to be closed. The others looked at Tang in surprise, but he explained that there were people there, after which the searchlight was directed there. The commander grimaced, recognizing the 2 foolish rookies. The light fell on Ang Lu and their unexpected enemy.